excited about the panel that we have here. I will start by introducing right to my right, Rachel Stillwell, who is an entertainment attorney based in Los Angeles. She has clients both domestic and internationally and has dealt with intellectual property matters at home and abroad. She's also an active part of our Los Angeles chapter as an advocacy co-chair, supports us with work as well with the Music First Coalition, and it's been really on the front lines of a lot of the advocacy work that we do. She was also one of the first participants in some of the Department of State music diplomacy efforts that we've been engaged in, and we're going to talk more about that. I'm going to jump over the next person and do Peggy first and introduce Peggy Dole, the 20-year veteran of the music industry and the founder and CEO of Navigation Partners, a consulting firm, and she has had extensive experience in multicultural and international music and repertoire, which we are also going to unpack and dig into. And then finally, I'm just a true joy and honor to have with us a 4-time Grammy nominee, Rocky Dalumi, from Ghana. Rocky has been a pioneer in Ghanaian music with his own distinct Afro-root sound that combines elements of African music, Caribbean music, soul, and more. And just really excited to dig in to your experiences and career and what we can learn from you as well. So just to set this up for everyone, the global recorded music revenues have grown for the 10th consecutive year, according to the IFPI, the organization that represents the recording industry around the world. And 3 of the world's 7 regions have posted year-over-year double-digit gains. In the Middle East and North Africa, it's been almost a 23% increase year-over-year in revenue, followed by Sub-Saharan Africa, which is a 22.6% increase year-over-year, and Latin America, which is a 22.5% year-over-year. Sub-Saharan Africa, for the first time, saw revenue surpass $100 million US, and these emerging markets are far outstripping more mature markets in the United States. Japan, Europe, which are either flat or low single-digit growth. We're seeing this expansive growth in these new emerging marketplaces. But in addition to music growing overseas, we're continuing to see global music find an audience here in the United States, which is the largest music market in the world. Last year, Latin music was the fastest growing genre in the United States, and other genres like Afrobeats and K-pop continue to grow and find audiences as well. So with that context, what's going on? So that's going to be the conversation that we're going to have and kind of unpack and talk about that and learn from the experiences that all of you have had. So to start with, I'm going to start, I think, with you, Peggy. So we're going to jump around a little bit. So you've worked in a number of global markets, including the ones that I've just described as having the biggest growth right now. So talk a little bit about that. And I'm curious, when you go into a new market for the first time, what's the most important first step that you see that will set you up for success in that market?
Can I answer your first question first?
Yeah.
The what's going on question?
Sure.
Streaming. I mean, if you go back, because I've been in the business for a very long time, before digital, when we had physical boundaries, we had physical goods, we had manufacturing, we had distribution, we had countries which were very dominant pirated, so there was no legitimate infrastructure to sell and actually make money. So people were selling pirated music, which I'm sure is still going on all over the place. But you could go buy a $1 CD at a flea market in Mexico, or for 50 cents on the street in Bogota, and it was because the infrastructures were not in place. Even in those particular countries, they were. But if you go to Vietnam, or can everybody hear me? All of a sudden, it got very loud. Okay. So at any rate, with streaming, all of a sudden those frontiers have dissolved, and you don't have those physical issues anymore. What you have is the ability for somebody with a telephone to be able to hear something. So now we've got these emerging markets in places that didn't have that physical infrastructure, the continent of Africa, for example, where there wasn't a lot of physical infrastructure outside of South Africa. And so we're dealing with Obviously MENA, the Middle East is opening up. That's a whole other conversation. You still have Japan, which is still very dominant physical, still not as much digital. So you've still got transition happening. And with this transition, you have this growth. So streaming, in one word, is my answer.
All right,
Yeah.
so I'm gonna jump from that then to Rocky, because even though we're talking about this kind of very recent change that we see in markets growing, you've had a career for 20 years releasing music globally. How have you seen the impact of streaming in your career?
Hello, 1, 2. Well, to start with, when I first started as a musician, the ecosystem was controlled by, a few independent, I would say merchants, because they were not really organized record labels. And that was to be said for not only Ghana, but across the continent. So music was very regional. It was only in certain, few instances where you have a song take off one place and then all of a sudden it will move to the other country and then spread across the continent. So when I started off, I remember in terms of my personal story, I was, this young musician whose intention was not necessarily to only be able to get a career in my country, but I wanted to take it outside of the country, across the continent, and around the world. So it was kind of an initial vision of mine. But then the structural impediments became very apparent to me. I lived in a town that was, far from the capital. So if you wanted to make it, you have to go to the capital. You have to go to the merchants who, made this music. You have to go there, appeal to them. And then if they like you, they'll sign you, and then they'll start, making your records and also doing all the radio stuff. So I was accepted into the University of Ghana. I moved. My older brother actually was in the university. He came up to me and was like, hey, you got to come to the school. And I was like, I want to be a musician. And from when we grew up, everybody thinks that when you become too educated, you give up on your musical dreams because, traditionally and culturally too, everybody didn't see the value of music because nobody really made a living out of music. And you always saw, the stories of your icons, and then, at the later part of their lives, like literally, they'll have to do fundraisers to support them. So no parent was interested in that. So I got to the capital. My brother was like, well, the only way you can be able to realize your dreams if you leave the small town, go into the capital, and then pitch one of these guys, and maybe he will give you the opportunity to start. I get in town, the capital, the first day, throw all my books, walk into one of them's office with a demo that I had made, which was basically my voice and then my neighbor who was singing the bass line. So in my opinion, this was how you pitch it. So I go and sit in front of this guy. He listens to it, and after a while, he said, well, Rocky, I like your voice to begin with, but this music is not going to make it in Ghana. You can maybe, if you're able to travel, this music will be able to find an audience. But right here, I'm not sure if this was going to happen. So here I was, with a big dream, but then the first meeting I have was to deflate, that dream that I had. So then I go to the second one to the same thing. But then he had a thought. He's like, well, you sound a little bit reggae, but if you put more of the traditional music and your culture, maybe that will give you an advantage. So that stuck with me. But from the onset, I knew that I had to be an independent artist. I recognized that the only way for me to be able to advance my career was to do it all by myself. So being a university-educated student, I first researched how to establish a record label, how to register it, how to record it. And then, because I always also knew that there were no structures there, there was no board where you could go by and then say, hey, I have this dream. Can you help me? Can you invest? There was nothing like that. So United States was a very big attraction to me. So I left my final year in the quest to advance my music, came to the US, went to go, Los Angeles was where I landed because I wanted to be where the action was, because I wanted to learn the foundations of the industry, and at the same time, grow myself as an artist. I became an intern at a record label. And then through that, I really learned the ropes, and then went back to Ghana and recorded my first album. And then that album, took off in the country. So that started my pathway and my journey as an artist. But then it was difficult in terms of distribution and people being heard, because you had to, in order for your music to be heard in the US, you had to go through a record label, and the record label had to sign you in the markets that you're trying to get access to. But now what I've seen, fast forward to the times right now, is that the change in terms of the internet came and then started shifting everything, because African artists now did not have to transcend the local boundaries and then also into international boundaries. You could make music, put it online, and then by the following day, you could have audiences all around. So the journey, we had to do almost like contact sport, block to block to block to block, in building my career. But now I see that the internet has been able to become the equalizer that has also spurred in a new wave of renaissance when it comes to African music and its access. And I feel that, the whole digital world came to transform something that when I was growing up was a big impediment for me. So back to your answer in terms of streaming has become a great way of now our music being accessed around the world. Yes.
So we scripted all these questions, but I'm much more interested in following the conversation that's happening here. So, really interested listening to Rocky's perspective as how you started as an artist and how you tried to launch that. So I'm curious for both Peggy and Rachel. You sit in two different places. So as an attorney who's supporting an artist, or as someone who is working for a label, going into what's the difference in the perspective of, that was Rocky's experience. How do you go in and support an individual from the role that you play in that same situation?
You want me to go? I've already talked. I don't want to hog this.
You go.
Rachel, you go.
Sure. So what I've learned, in part from working with Rocky, but also in part from working with my mentee in Ghana, who we'll talk about in a minute, is there's a lot more equalizing that needs to happen. While there has been a great deal of growth in music revenue in sub-Saharan Africa, like 74% of that is South Africa, which leads the rest of that for Nigeria and Ghana, most of it going to Nigeria. And then while infrastructure in the digital age has increased exponentially, there's still an incredible amount of work that still needs to be done. So, so there are things that are going right, but there are things that still need work. If you are an independent artist, if you're an independent artist in Ghana, there are still obstacles to finding good international digital distribution. Copyright laws in Africa are not, and in particular in Ghana, are not as strong as they are here. As Rocky was saying, music education is something that we really value here and try to convince lawmakers to also value here. And traditionally it's been, from what I understand, difficult to get public and private sector investment in music education in Africa. It makes it difficult for people infrastructure-wise, while it's improving, it's still developing, and so many of those artists who are creating great music that is finding its way into the ears of other people around the world, there are still great challenges in collecting the money that's being generated if you're an artist, if you're a songwriter. Along those lines, if you have a combination of challenges with infrastructure and challenges with music education, and challenges in inequity in where that money is going geographically, you find that you've got artists and songwriters who, unlike here in the US, where it's now a very collaborative industry creatively, where people, are dying to work with each other, write with each other, do co-writes, co-productions, and all of that. What I've learned in my relationships is there's a lot of solitude in people who would like to be collaborating with other people on projects and are intimidated and scared to do so because the infrastructure seems so complicated, and it's just easier to sit in your room and do it yourself. And that's a loss creatively, and and a loss in terms of music economies, I think.
God, I loved that. And you bring up a good point when you talk about collaboration. I think that one of the things that cannot be underestimated is you guys, I mean to have my back to you, I'm so sorry, is the importance of community. Because community is key, and it's tough, especially if you live in a country where it's so difficult to just get across town. Years and years ago, I was actually deployed to London. I was living in New York. I was deployed to London to have a conversation with our head of business affairs. I was working for a label, and my A&R guy in Paris called me up one day at 12 o'clock noon and said, "Peggy, I need you to be in London tomorrow morning." And I'm like, okay. And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because we're renewing so-and-so's contract." And he has not renewed. And the reason he has not renewed is because it is the rainy season. And he cannot sign that contract right now. He cannot get to the bank. He cannot, and these are just things that people in the United States take for granted. We take for granted because we are so privileged and we have such great infrastructure in this country. And, even though it's not completely perfect, we don't think about what other people are dealing with day-to-day challenges. So to Rachel's point about it making it difficult to have creative collaboration, maybe you don't even have the technology, or maybe you don't have, and that's why it's so important that we work together across all boundaries, across all languages, across all cultures, with each other to build an infrastructure that works on the business side, not just the creative side, to Rachel's point about collections, about making sure that everybody in the ecosystem is paid. I mean, that isn't even happening here. We think it is, but it's not. And that's where tech comes in. So we talk about music and we talk about creative, and these are all really important things, but we also have technology and we have business. And technology and business and music, I think we would all do very well if we think about those more together instead of as separate little silos, because that's how we're going to, I think, build something that will serve so everybody can benefit from everybody's creativity, and so that everybody can get paid, and to help reduce some of that inequality that Rachel spoke about.
So Rocky, I'm curious. So you live in Ghana now, but
Yes. So once the thing is that I wanted my musical identity to reflect where I was from, and so it never lost on me. I saw myself more in terms of the systems that were not present there. I'll come to the US and learn them. Mm-hmm. So first of all, when I went back, I realized also that not only was it the radio, it was hard to get play on the radio unless you're aligned with a certain faction of people. It was when you were booked for concerts too, the concert promoters didn't really understand, how to put together concerts. So what I did was that I started my own festival in Ghana. So the idea of starting those things too was not necessarily to first of all, take care of the needs, my own needs, but I also wanted to use that to also leapfrog and show how excellence in terms of challenge the industry. So when my first record was released, it became very popular. I got a license here in the United States, for a compilation. Got back home, started a festival. The festival was actually money that I had cobbled up from working in the US. I funded it. I got the best sound system, brought some of the, upcoming artists. So everybody who came there, all of a sudden, the promoters who were who hire me, and then I will show up there, and there's like literally, they didn't understand in terms of, the monitors, this, that whole setup, which I thought was just something that was very obvious. I felt that there was those gaps in the industry. So with my festival, I'll hire the biggest, bring the best engineer, the artists who play on it, and then everybody will be like, wow, this is an incredible experience. So in doing so too, I was really trying to challenge the industry. So my concert went on for about 10 years. It was about 50,000 people every year. It was called Rocky Dauni Independence Flash. It was held every Independence. So no matter where I was, I'll go back and do that. And for several years, I had always believed in that. I will come, learn things here, talk to industry leaders here, go back there and then try to implement it. If even it was kind of gradual, I did it according to my own power. And I think in doing so, there was a lot of contributions that happened within the Ghanaian industry that I felt that today, a lot of the industry is benefiting from that, because it's one of the, I would say that, leading industries when it comes to the continent.
So I'm curious. I imagine it's a really difficult decision to decide, as your career grows, can you maintain, build, grow your career living in Ghana versus relocating to the United States? Obviously, if you did relocate to the United States, you'd have a lot more tools available to you. So for you, and really for the whole panel, I'm kind of interested in that idea of the choice that a global artist has to make of, can I stay in my home country and build this career and be successful, or do I have to move to Europe, or do I have to use to the United States? And what is that calculation like for you? And then I'd like for everybody to jump in on that.
Well, from me, it was the original vision, because I always believed in, my music as, not first of all as a calling, but a mission. So with a mission, there was also a bigger vision of how do I manifest this, especially considering the environment in which I grew up. We didn't have the systems were not in place. The talent pool was everywhere you went, there was talent like myself. And I was asking, why are all of these talents not having the opportunity, to really rise above? But I felt that that was a systemic issue. So in order for me to also, after meeting those early music producers who had told me point blank that my audience, if I want to find a bigger audience, you have to leave the shores. So at first, that was my intention, and then that intention was also kind of reinforced by those conversations. So United States and America and Los Angeles was an attractive space for me, because I felt that this was the place where I could come, first of all, to meet label heads, to learn about the industry. So my first job was working as an intern for a record label. I wasn't paid, but every morning.
Back to the other panel interns.
Yeah. So I learned the ropes. I did radio promotion, and even within the ecosystem of the label, I made sure that everybody will push me to different departments, because I wanted to learn everything. So after I learned that, then I went back, recorded, and I knew that distribution systems were very difficult over there. So I worked with Ghanaian musicians, but when the record was done, I came back to the US and tried to find distribution for it. But that time, you had to have, you have to do physical distribution. You had to be signed to a label. You had to had a distribution deal. But now, that paradigm has changed. So during the early parts of my career, it was important for you to do the geographic kind of moving up and down, and then sometimes what the press that I generated from outside too became valuable at home because everybody wanted to see you doing something outside too. So when I got my first concerts that was booked outside of the country, it became news in the country. And then when I went back to the country too and did work in the country too, it also helped my booking agencies that were here that were trying to also help me move forward. So it was very important in terms of the moving back and forth. But that was when you didn't have communication was, very difficult. You needed to have your press kit together. It was everything you had to mail it, But with the digital age, things started changing, and I don't feel like as an artist right now you need your presence in different markets is important when you have a certain momentum and you want to create an audience. Obviously, being present in market is very, very important for marketing. But I think the initial ability to really ignite interest in your music, you can do it without having to geographically be present in that country. You can release a record, and many of the upcoming musicians have had that type of success. People even like who have never left the confines of even their traditional village now can put a record out, and all of a sudden they create a following locally, and all of a sudden continentally, and then all of a sudden globally. So I think there's been a paradigm shift that to some extent has favored the independent mindset, and it keeps evolving. And my story and my step-to-step mission to try and bring my music from the continent to without the continent, I feel is a test case, study of how, originally you had to move around, but now you have tools that can aid you be able to amplify that objective.
Peggy, how have you helped artists navigate that?
There are two things here. We have an artist like Rocky who lives outside of the U.S., who wants to come into the U.S., who wants his music heard by people in the U.S. And then we have artists from inside the U.S. who want to go outside of the U.S., right? So, and I've actually worked on both sides of this. So, when I'm in the U.S. and I have an artist that is like, okay, we have, we think we have a market in Brazil, or we think we have a market here, there, or everywhere. I mean, there's a lot of research that has to be done, to Rocky's point about how deeply he researched, every step as he was figuring out what to do. And it's not just language. I was working years ago with a Puerto Rican artist, and I remember his manager telling me, oh, you've got to take him to Texas. He will be huge in Texas because they speak Spanish in Texas. But, anybody who understands the market realizes that most of the people who are living in Texas are from Mexico, or they're from, they're multi-generation from Mexico or Central America. Not a lot of Caribbean, and these had Caribbean rhythms. So, he was just an uneducated person. So, and that's okay, but you have to do that work. You have to educate yourselves. You have to do that homework to figure out, okay, where do we go? And then it's how do we get there? Well, the media is always your friend. It's not always, well, it can also be your enemy, but make no mistake, it's a double-edged sword. But it's, it is, you want to find those media connections. And, today that means something very different. Back, years ago, it was all about television, and it was all about radio. Well, that can be really difficult to get unless there's a compelling reason for them to want to program something. And so, how do you build that? Well, the good news is with the internet and with community, and with, you can create a story, you can get it out there, and perhaps it can get picked up by media. But I think media is very, very important. I think strategic alliances are very, very important. I had one artist from Mexico who, doesn't speak English very well, and who had an incredible, incredible career in Mexico. And we were able to do work with him in other parts of Latin America because he had theme songs on telenovelas. So Televisa, which is the dominant kind of state-run biggest broadcast network in Mexico, they created the telenovela, I think, or they were certainly a big part of it. And the telenovela had these theme songs, and so I would get inquiries from Israel. I would get inquiries from Korea. I could take him to Brazil. I developed him in Chile because of those telenovelas. And so again, it's what is the hook? Finding the community, finding, doing the research, and finding the places where there are commonalities. In this case, the telenovela was the commonality. It was the theme song. People heard it. They loved it. I was able to, we were able to, my team there, it wasn't me, we were able to get radio to pick it up. But again, that homework had been done. The research had been done. So it's finding, again, alliances. I'm a big believer in organic. I had a mentor very early on who told me that if the music starts in the street, it doesn't matter what the genre is, it will have sustainability. It doesn't matter if it's hip hop, if it's rock, if it's reggae, it will have sustainability. If it's slammed down the throat through commercial radio to the general market, you may have a hit song, but then it may be over. And so when it comes to developing any market, whether it's your hometown or outside the US, I think that sustainability is very important. And it's finding, again, those strategic alliances, whether they're people, it's commonalities of culture. It could be language, may not be language. And and finding those vehicles, and again, trying to parlay that into getting some form of media response. Media, igniting media interest. And, you have to do something perhaps compelling and captivating to do that. We were talking earlier today about an artist that Tony Alexander has signed to publishing. And Reed, who I don't think is here right now, Reed was telling us that when during the fires in Los Angeles, when they had the Grammys this year, it was right after those horrible fires. And that they put together a team of Grammy, I don't really know exactly what happened, Todd, you could correct me, but it sounds like it was a Grammy initiative for board members or people who are members to come together to do some form of work to help, outreach work to help those people who were victims of the fires. And that this artist, that Tony Alexander has signed for publishing, he showed up because he's a member of the Grammys, and he showed up with gifts, with roses, with flowers to give to every single person who was helping. I mean, that's creativity. That's doing something for community. That's and in doing so, as an artist, I mean, everybody there, all those Grammy people, they became aware of who he was, not because he was trying to slam his name down their throats, but because he was coming from a heart-centered place of how can I be of service. And so again, finding that captivating, compelling story that then can translate or transition into something a little bigger and a little bigger in an organic, sustainable way. That's how I do it.
I love that. And I love the way that authentic relationships do lead to that organic growth and connection. And Rachel, I want to, we'll go to the audience for questions in just a second, but Rachel, you had the chance over this last year to be part of a new initiative we started with the State Department called the American Music Mentorship Program. The idea behind this is to reach into mid-level music professionals around the world who are trying to level up their skill set. And I'm curious your experience, as we talked about, again, the things that artists need where they live. What did you learn through your mentorship program about what are the biggest needs that your mentee needs, for example? And then what did you learn from them in return that maybe surprised you? Give us just kind of a little flavor of that, and then we'll take some questions from the audience.
I was privileged to be paired up with an entertainment and intellectual property attorney, Antoinette Boama from Accra, Ghana. And if anybody ever asks you to participate as a mentor in a Recording Academy program, say yes. And get ready to learn a lot more from your mentee than you're putting in. If you are open to that and are not phoning it in, it's going to come back to you 10 times more. You're going to get a lot more than you put in. And that was my experience. So just do it. She is amazing and smart and asked tons of questions, and most of those questions were about, well, what's the same, what's similar if you're practicing law, music law in the United States versus if you're doing it in Ghana, and the biggest difference are in how the copyright laws are structured. And so we talked about that, but we also just spent a ton of time talking about the practicalities of, okay, what goes into a record deal? What goes in if they own the masters? What goes into a record deal if it's a licensing agreement? How do producer agreements work? What about admin deals? Just the nuts and bolts of practicing transactional music law. And as it happens, I have a side hustle teaching music law at Loyola Law School in Los Angeles, and I knew that there were class recordings from my prior semester. So because the Recording Academy Gravitas was there and the State Department Gravitas was there, I was able to get permission from Loyola Law School to just give her 24 hours of instruction on videotape that was designed for United States law students who had all taken a copyright law prerequisite. It was perfect for her. So we didn't have to waste a whole lot of time in me teaching her nuts and bolts day to day. We got to talk about specific problems on, she's stuck on a producer deal here. What do we do about it? We were able to work through it in a really practical way and have her go audit and take my course with the blessing of my university for free. But I learned so much from her, and and I would die to collaborate and work with her.
Well, I love how that actually feeds from Peggy's answer about community and collaboration. And I think what I love about what the Academy is doing is that we're trying to create that space where collaboration and community happens, which again helps build up creators wherever they are. With that, I'd love to take a couple of questions. If people have questions in the audience, we have such an amazing resource here. We've got one over there.
I just had. Is this on? Okay. Yeah. I just had a question based on like songwriting, because I heard y'all said like a lot about like community and stuff. So like in terms of songwriting, does the environment really like focus? If you focus on the environment, does that help with the execution? And if so, is that like stopping progress too, or like making you do better? Does that make sense?
When you say the environment, are you talking about the environment in which you're writing, like together, like in a room, or are you
not
talking about
quite.
the environment of your home? Or what are you talking about? The country? What are you talking about?
Well, just like the space in general, like kind of like mindset in a way, but yeah, definitely community too. But
I mean,
yeah,
I know
space
people who write on Zoom.
on Zoom.
I know people who do co-writes. I know people who have had massive hit records who, as writers, through co-writing on Zoom. Before Zoom, it was Skype. So you can have people in, somebody in Texas writing with somebody in Oregon, or somebody in London writing with somebody in New York, or, Rocky in Ghana co-writing with you in DC. I mean, it can happen. So I think the key, and I'm not a songwriter, and so I should probably let Rocky talk. I think the key is to bring ideas and your thoughts and your snippets or whatever it is, and then just you sit with somebody, whether it's in person or not, and you co-create. Co-creating is the key here. It is all about co-creating. It's all about cooperative. It's all about collaboration and communication and community, as we said. And as a writer, I think I think you can control that. I think you can determine. I don't think you're a victim of whatever the environment is. I think you can determine what that environment is and make it a really creative space.
Thank you.
Well, to add to that, I think that when it comes to collaboration, songwriting, I think inspiration transcends geography. And it's a matter of how the nature of the song, the intentions of the song, and then the people collaborating to how they vibe with each other or they connect with each other. Because music is something that it's not mechanical. You know, you have to inspire each other. And I feel that when collaborations are done in a way that, you know, really allows everybody to be themselves, but at the same time leave a little bit for the others to contribute who they are, then you create something that is holistically one, but it's a combination of different parts. And when you're able to evolve to that level of connection, it doesn't matter where you are. You know, you can meet somebody like today and go write a song together, and then it will gel. Sometimes it takes a long time. You know, maybe your strength is melody, that person's strength is lyrics. So when you come, then all of a sudden you see that the lyrical aspect of you, that person complements, and that person sees that you have a stronger melodic gift, then you also start. So it's a matter of, it's almost like a cosmic dance, you know, and you all figure out how, in the long run, the primary objective of how the song is gonna sound. And once you have that objective in mind, I believe that you can really, it doesn't matter where you are. You know, you can be able to create something that is magical, that everybody else who hears it can resonate with.
Beautiful. Yes. You know, I wish we had another half hour, because I think there's a lot we could talk about, not only in making, you know, because we know revenue's growing, right? I mean, I said at the top, the revenue, it's continuing to grow. How do we make sure the revenue is getting to the people that earned it? And I think that challenge is especially big in developing economies and around the world. Are the payment systems in place? Are the collection societies in place? Or is the legal regime in place around the world for global artists to be able to collect their royalties? We don't have the time to have that conversation, more than to tee up the question of knowing that that is a challenge for the future. So with that, I thank you all for being here. This is an amazing panel. I feel like we could go on for an
Thank you so much.
Yeah.